Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, How to Build GenAI Applications on MySQL Data. My name is Matt Brown, and I'll be your moderator today. One of my main jobs at SingleStore is to organize these weekly AI webinars, 2 per week, demoing data and AI use cases and new tools and technologies. I post about these upcoming webinars every week, so if these topics are interesting to you, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn to stay in the loop with those topics. I'd also love to hear any feedback or ideas that you would love to see in our future sessions. Speaking of future sessions, on Friday, we will be presenting how to build a multi-agent AI app with AutoGen. Come join us to see a live demo on how to use Microsoft's new open source AutoGen tool, which can seamlessly communicate with SingleStore and leverage multiple agents to perform a task. If this sounds interesting to you, I hope you will RSVP now. Put the little short link there on this screen. I'll put that in the chat in a minute. You can also take a photo or a screenshot of that QR code that's on your screen, and I hope to see you on Friday. Back to today's topic. We'd love you to participate in this discussion throughout the session using the Zoom Q&A button at the bottom of your console. We have an internal mission statement to answer 100% of our audience questions, even when we have thousands of registrants like we do today. We will answer as many questions as we can live, and then we will follow up with the rest via email. But please make sure you include your name and email address when asking questions. We will not be answering any anonymous questions. We'd also love for you to try out today's technology. In fact, anyone who tries it today will be entered for a chance to win new AirPods Pros. All you need to do is click that short link that's on your screen. I'll put that in the chat in a minute as well, and just log in. You may know that SingleStore has had a free trial offer for many years, but just in the past few weeks, we've also introduced a new free shared tier. No payment commitments, totally free. And maybe Akmal can talk about that a little bit later today. Let me go ahead and introduce our speaker for today. Akmal Chowdhury is a senior technical evangelist at SingleStore. He's got strong expertise in big data, machine learning, and AI. He is an awesome author. Highly recommend you follow him on his Medium blog posts. They're awesome. He's also a regular speaker at these webinars. Welcome, Akmal. You now have the floor.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Matt, and thank you all for joining. Matt's going to go dark now, and he'll be monitoring the questions. And again, we'll hopefully have plenty of time for Q&A. Okay, so please do post your questions there. And so there's me. Okay, so when I used to have hair, so it's taken a few years ago, that one. But I've been with SingleStore about 2 years, 8 months, 9 months or so now. And so when I joined around that time, I created a free account. So the link that Matt will share with you in the chat, please do create yourself a free account. As Matt was saying, we used to do like $500 worth of US dollars worth of credits previously. Okay, that's when I created my free account. That switched to $600. And then this free shared tier came along very recently, which is basically you create and instantaneously you get the resources, okay? Because it is a shared environment. And it's a great way to just get up to speed, you know, do a little bit of data loading, run some queries. It's pretty reasonable, you know, a gigabyte, I think, of data, one database, up to 10 tables. And there's some other limitations as well. But the main advantage that you get is that it's instantaneous, almost, okay? Literally. And I can show you that in a couple of minutes, okay? So please do go and register if you haven't already. It'll take less than a minute of your time. You know, either use Microsoft or Google or just put your details in, and that will get you in. In the meantime, then, so I'll do a little bit of an introduction, okay? Just cover what SingleStore is. A couple of case studies, very briefly, showing you some users of MySQL that kind of switched to SingleStore and some of the pain points that they had and the reasons why they switched. And then we'll move to the issue of generative AI and vectors. And so really the two kind of go hand in hand, I would say. I mean, there are things like autoencoders around today, but if you want to do some serious work, you need some ability to generate these embeddings and add something new. I mean, it's a bit like, let's say you've got a large language model that doesn't know anything about William Shakespeare, for example. So what you do, you want to teach it all the plays of William Shakespeare so that it can learn the style of the bard, and how he wrote. And then you could ask the LLM, okay, write me a play in the style of William Shakespeare, okay? But how do you do that, okay? And so the main thing is that there is a kind of representation of the data that you have to give to the LLM that it understands in a format that it understands. Okay, and these embeddings are a great way to do that. And vectors is the way to go. So more about that a little bit later. And I've got a couple of demos for you. And so the nice thing, one of the nice things that we have within the cloud-based environment for SingleStore data platform as it is now, not just the database management system, is there's this thing called Gallery, again, which I'll show it to you momentarily. And it's a great way to just load resources in notebooks, and then you can get started immediately. I mean, you don't have to load these in. All right, let's move on a little bit then. Okay, so just 2 slides on SingleStore, the sort of kind of standard discussion about the product. So historically, I mean, if you've come across the technology previously, you may have known it as MemSQL. So both the product and the company were called that, and the focus was very much on in-memory. Okay, hence the name Mem. In-memory OLTP, very, very fast for that type of data processing. Subsequently added support for columnar data for analytics. Okay, so you can do these operations, sum, min, max, average, count at scale and speed. Okay, and what the company did then was to develop this kind of unified table type, which can store both types of data. There's a patent for it as well. And of course, you can achieve similar results with other products as well. But SingleStore is unique in that it offers both capabilities in one product, okay? There is no need for you to go and integrate with something else to achieve the same thing, okay? That's the nice thing. And so we'll look at that momentarily. All right, so here is the kind of 30,000-foot view SingleStore with universal storage, okay, which I just kind of mentioned. The ability to store both, and process online transaction processing, OLTP, and OLAP, online analytical processing. And there's a variety of ways and technologies that you might work with SingleStore. So if you've been a regular and you've attended some of my previous webinars, you'll know that I've used Kafka, for example. I've used Spark as well. It was about a year ago. And Matt's actually got a webinar. We've been discussing this recently about doing a webinar using some technology that I evaluated about a year ago, but kind of updating it and looking at how LLMs kind of handle it now. So fraud detection, great for banking. So we'll look at Spark again in that context in the very near future. Other sources, so S3, for example, you might be working with Hadoop, HDFS as well. And the animation here is meant to show that you can ingest in parallel and at scale. Okay, more about this in a separate slide momentarily. We'll show you that very, very shortly. So we run on the 3 main cloud platforms. Just get my box here. There we go. AWS, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure. Today, we very much focus on AWS. Okay, that's what I'll be using. So this notebooks will be powered by AWS. We do have customers running on-prem as well. That's entirely possible. And one of the things that you get is when you register on the SingleStore portal, in the left nav, right down at the bottom, there's a section that you can click on and you can actually access a license. That license gives you the ability to install a 4-node cluster free of charge. And that is not constrained or limited in any way other than the fact that it's only 4 nodes. Okay, so the product is fully functional, exactly what you get in the cloud. And we do have actually some customers running that as well. I mean, then you can install that wherever you want. Okay, so it could be on-prem, it could be in the cloud somewhere, and it's entirely your choice. There's a Docker container available as well if you're interested. My recommendation, though, is that if you are new to the product and you want to try it out, the best way to do it is to create an account on the portal in the cloud. Nothing to install locally, so there's zero risk, okay, which is great. And that makes your lives a lot easier because you can just utilize the technology, excuse me, in your own time and your own place, wherever you are. As long as you've got some internet access, you can do some work. Other things, so SingleStoreDB, the database, store data types. So yes, it has its roots in relational technology, but we've covered some of these other types as well. So this kind of multi-model, geospatial, time series. If you, again, you're a regular, you know that I've covered some of these topics previously. We've full text search. Okay, so that's the Lucene full text search engine built in. And that's actually great because one of the things that you might want to do, especially if you're going to work with sort of LLMs and storing vectors, is, doing things like semantic search. But maybe you want to combine that with full text search, okay? And that's a great use case. And again, I'll point you to some resources that you can have a look on that one. JSON support has been there for quite some time. It's got even better because we now offer this SingleStore Kai, which has gone GA recently. So that's MongoDB compatibility. And so the nice thing is that the product is both MySQL wire compatible and MongoDB wire compatible. And last but not least here, the vectors. Okay, so vector support has been in the products for a long time, relatively speaking. Okay, I know the world kind of moves fast these days, but since 2017, we've had that capability. And today, I'm going to show you some of the new stuff that we've got. Okay, so we have a vector type now, and we've got support for a wide range of indexes as well. Okay, this is in preview mode. The thing is, it's worth trying out because, this kind of approximate nearest neighbor, the ability to do analytics. And, in some cases, it may be that you're happy to give up accuracy, but get the performance and the speed. And that could be very important in terms of business decisions that you, as business leaders, make, for example. Other things, so real-time decisions, AI apps, dynamic experiences, these just kind of round off some of the additional capabilities, dashboards, ad hoc queries, so there's a built-in SQL editor as well. And of course, can do all of these kind of machine learning things because of this notebook environment, okay? So things like TensorFlow, scikit-learn, all of these packages you can load in and you can run them. If you're, again, a regular, you know that for the dashboards, I'm a big fan of some sort of free open source software. And I tend to use that much more so than, some of the more established technologies on the market. But equally, within the notebook environment, you can use things like Matplotlib, Plotly Express, these kind of things in terms of generating graphs, charts, pie charts, those kind of things. I mean, that's all self-contained. For the streaming data ingest, a couple of things there. So streaming ingestion, as I mentioned before, fast parallel bulk loading. We have this kind of create pipeline operation. Get to see a little bit of that. And you get some nice features as well. So the transactional consistency, and that's very important. These within relational technology for a long time, these kind of ACID features, the atomicity, consistency, isolation, durability, very important, especially when you're dealing with sort of OLTP type applications and the exactly one semantics as well. Now, we support a wide variety of data types too, so JSON, Avro, Parquet, and CSV. And you've seen a couple of these in the previous slide, okay? So I mentioned Hadoop, I mentioned Kafka, Amazon S3, but the new stuff that we've added recently, which again is in preview, is MongoDB support, which I've demoed a couple of times already, and MySQL, okay, which is the kind of the subject of today's presentation. So these are, this mechanism provides an easy way to be able to take data from an existing system and be able to get it into your single store environment. And because it is change data capture, I mean, what you could do is that if you have a strong commitment to a particular database product, let's say you are using MongoDB or MySQL, for example, already, and you don't necessarily want to give that up, you can keep your existing investment. Using this kind of pipeline capability, you can feed the data into SingleStore and use that for analytics, for example, and it'd be awesome. Performance is superb. but you don't lose what you already have. Okay, so this is a kind of an augmentation, if you like. Equally, if you want to remove those technologies at some point in the future, you can do so as well. So I've mentioned SingleStore Kai already, and because SingleStore is MySQL wire compatible anyway, it provides strong capabilities in terms of taking data from MySQL anyway, and the tools and things like the CLI tools, for example, or JDBC, ODBC. I mean, all of those will work very well. All right. Couple of words about MySQL. Kudos, okay, to the developers of the product. Okay, it is the world's most popular open source database. Long time in development, around a bit less than the time I've been in the IT world, so 25 years. And DB Engines, if you ever go there and look at the rankings, it ranks as the second most popular database system and the top most rated, open source development product there. RDBMSs, as you can see, make up the bulk of the top there. And so one of the criticisms that you often see and leveled at SQL is that it's the kind of thing that your grandfather used to use. Well, I like my grandfather, and I like SQL. I mean, it is awesome. The ability to ask questions of the database and essentially leave the database to figure out the best way to retrieve the data for you. I mean, it's very mature, well understood, one of the most in-demand skills in the world today as well. And MySQL, I think part of that reason is very, very popular as well. And for operational, reasons and the ease of use, the ease of installation, it's a no-brainer. Lots of people like it. Great. However, and you were waiting for this, I think, some challenges with it, okay? Despite the benefits and the awesome sort of capabilities that the product has, there are some limitations, and possibly you've hit some of these yourselves in the kind of environments that you work with. So there's a couple of things listed there in terms of scale out, for example, optimization, latency, perhaps, performance for analytics types applications. And then sometimes, and I've come across this as well in the literature, for example, and I've heard of customers that augment it with additional technologies for sort of caching, things like Memcached or Redis, for example. So yes, there are projects, there are custom builds out there as well that address some of these limitations. But the thing is that not all of us have the resources of Facebook, or not all of us have the resources of Amazon, or Google, or Microsoft. I mean, the large organizations that tend to do this put in quite a bit of time, effort, and commitment in terms of doing that. So yes, there are some cases where the technology is used in these large deployments, but they've tweaked and tuned the product very specifically for those environments. And then for the general case, I mean, if you're looking for an off-the-shelf solution, like I said, for the rest of us, it's very, very difficult to put in the time and resources to be able to do that. Quite a challenge. And the other thing is that, customer kind of case studies, I've got two coming up. So we have one here from Fathom, originally used MySQL. And this is a quote from Jack Ellis. So MySQL wasn't built for these high-scale analytical use cases. So they very much focused around the analytics sort of space. And then another one just below there. If you compare to SingleStore, queries that would run on MySQL in hours would take 5 seconds. It's a different world at this speed. So there are instances where if you are hitting these bottlenecks, you have these pain points, moving from MySQL to something like SingleStore could be the way to go. Okay. And so a common pattern or use case is exactly this, running analytical queries. All right, let me just briefly go through a couple of customer case studies. Okay, so I mentioned Jack Ellis already. And so let me just, there's another quote from him, but let me just describe to you a little bit more about the challenge that he had with the Fathom Analytics. So bad performance for interactive queries, excuse me, with user request timing out, and they were using MySQL, Redis, and DynamoDB as well. Okay, so not just one product, but several of these together. And what they were able to do was to replace all three of these with SingleStore, because it was able to achieve, in terms of their features and functionality that they were looking for, and the performance as well. It was a bit of a no-brainer for them in the end. Lack of support for data drill downs and filtering. And so, I mean, these astonishing kind of numbers that you can see on the right-hand side in terms of the improvements that they've achieved, 12,000 times improvement in processing time, 1,000x improvements in query performance, 60% reduction in database total cost of ownership, TCO. And for business leaders, I mean, this is important as well, okay? Controlling cost and being able to see where the money is spent and being able to be, a bit more predictable in terms of the future requirements. I think these are very, very important. So technology is one thing, and it's great for developers. For business leaders, yes, I mean, tech is great, and sometimes it's kind of a black box to them, though, and you're looking for return on investment and TCO. Excuse me, TCO, and those are kind of very, very important. Another case study, digital asset research, DAR. Okay, so the challenge there, existing database, AWS Aurora, couldn't keep up. Database would get backed up and go down every few days, is the quote there. Okay? And they did look at a number of alternatives. So Snowflake was one of them. And that was good to a point. Okay, and that's mentioned on the next slide as well. But the quote there is, we got a big surprise the first month we went to use it. All I can say there is that I haven't used Snowflake personally, but what I have used is I've used MongoDB, Atlas, and the purpose for that was I was interested in analytics, and I was keen to test, a large-scale IoT type benchmark. And I had SingleStore on the one side, able to load the data and run the tests absolutely fine. On the other side, equivalent kind of environment running on Atlas. And I got a terrible shock when I received the bill for the test run, which I actually had to abandon. Otherwise, the figure would have gone much higher. And so these things kind of happen sometimes. Technology, when you start to use it in anger, when you start to scale it, when you start to push it a little bit in terms of the kind of processing that you want to do, unfortunately, it can become a slight headache there in terms of inability to scale, inability to give you the performance results that you need, as well as costing you an awful lot of money. So these factors, I think, can be very, very important. And so in this case, this particular company, 1 billion trades per day, 120 plus billion queries, okay, and then drop in TCO by 50%. Okay, I mean, that's, again, a considerable saving for them. All right. All right, so this is kind of just a summary of them. Starting with MySQL, data ingestion was a challenge. And so, slow contention, lots of outages, limited analytical capabilities, which you kind of mentioned a little bit earlier on, and expensive, cost prohibitive. So as I said, they did try some alternatives. Snowflake was one of them. And for them, the thing there was that price performance was a challenge. Cost predictability was critical to them in this line of business. And yes, the performance was kind of acceptable, but not exceptional. I mean, that's the key thing. They were looking for something better. And so the main point here is that in terms of this kind of modernization that you may be going through, perhaps within your own organizations, that this provides a solution for you that currently, certainly as far as the CDC technology that we have, we do support MongoDB and we do support MySQL, okay? And this is a great way to be able to take data from these existing environments, feed them into SingleStore. Like I said before, you may have it as a replacement or an augmentation kind of role for SingleStore. It's absolutely fine. But SingleStore, I think you'll find, will excel in the analytics space, and it can do the OLTP as well. So you may find that it's a better overall solution in the long run. Excuse me. Okay. Just below there, there's a few other sort of examples there, ETL, and you may be working in this sort of self-managed environment as well. That's absolutely fine. We're not really going to cover that today. Some other sort of techniques that you could use, MySQL dump. So I've mentioned the CDC. Okay, we'll look at that momentarily. Other ways you could get the data in and out. My MySQL dump, I used that not so long ago. That's a fairly large quantity of data, and then load it into SingleStore as well. That works very well. There are, although, as I mentioned, we have MySQL wire compatibility, And SingleStore supports quite a lot of the sort of MySQL syntax and features. There are some things that it doesn't support. So it's not 100%, all right? And then this is documented. And with some of these tools and technologies, in the cases that you may be trying to load in, for example, data that it doesn't recognize, it will ignore that. Or it will, it will certainly log a warning. And you can change those kind of settings if you want. Alternatively, I mean, there are other techniques such as just ETL. If you wish to do that, extract, transform, load, that can work well as well, although that may require somewhat more work. Okay, let's move on then, say a little bit about GenAI and vectors then. So generative AI, algorithms that learn from data to create new content such as images or text distinct from the input. Okay, so this is where the value add really comes in. And yes, there are some really cool demos out there, and we've seen some of these kind of product announcements in the recent past. I'm sure you've come across them as well. Equally, some disasters. I won't name names. You may guess which company I'm referring to, but that happens, okay? Not everything works as smoothly as you expected. And the other thing is that, at the moment, although people are talking about these kind of safeguards, to build into the technology, I think a lot of that is kind of ongoing discussion as well. There are things that you end up with as well, these hallucinations that can be quite a challenge. We did a webinar, I think it was last week, if Matt will correct me, I think it was Monday last week we did that one, that covered some of those aspects, okay, and some of the challenges around that. GPT models, which produce contextually relevant text based on prompts. So most of you, I would guess, will probably had a go at that, either ChatGPT or Bard or Gemini, as it's now called. And, this kind of text-based prompts, although the world is kind of moving in the multimodal direction, handling things like audio and images as well. That's going to be really cool. Diverse applications in creative fields, content generation, drug discovery, material design. And I think this is where we will get some real benefits, but it's going to take a little bit of time. I think the dust needs to settle. People need to see the practical benefits of this for some of these application domains, but I think it's getting there. I mean, it's like that kind of Gartner hype curve, okay? You see all the initial hype that people say around the technology. It takes a little bit of time for it to settle down, and eventually it finds a kind of a plateau, if you like, or a level it reaches a certain point where, yes, it's reached the mainstream, you're seeing practical benefits from it, and so on. And so I think we're very much at that stage, but I'm very upbeat and positive about this. And then part of that, and I alluded to this a little bit earlier in the presentation, is this notion of, finding ways that we can represent the data so that we can do things with it. And vectors are an efficient way to represent data as far as LLMs and machine learning is concerned. Okay, measure the similarity between different data. That's where we get this kind of semantic search. Speed up training for models, and represent multiple data types like text, images, and audio. So we have this mechanism, this means to be able to represent data that could mean different things, could mean the same thing. So think about a phrase such as the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog, right? Fairly well-known phrase in Western civilization. And then think about not just the textual representation of that, but how about if you had an image of a brown fox jumping over a dog? Or how about if you had an audio file? Excuse me. If you had an audio file, which again might be someone speaking exactly that phrase. Now, all of these things represent the same thing, and we could have some kind of vector representation for all of these. But in terms of the search space and then being able to determine that, yes, these things actually mean the same thing, can become a little bit of a challenge. I think so. This whole notion of multimodal data, as opposed to multi-model, which we talked about in the context of SingleStore a little bit earlier, I think that's, again, something that we're seeing more and more of in recent times. And again, I think this is going to be a great direction for where vectors and LLMs are going to go in the future. So if you've worked with MySQL, possibly in the context of sort of LLMs, and you know that there is a couple of ways that potentially you can store vectors. I mean, blob type is an obvious choice. JSON maybe. just do things as string format, for example, or use an array. That might work. There's a couple of things that I came across recently. So there is a plugin as well that allows you to work with this approximate nearest neighbor, and that's using something from Spotify. So this MySQL VSS plugin. I think it's early days with that. I seem to remember. So the version is still pretty low. And then, of course, this thing called MySQL HeatWave as well. That's something available from Oracle. Now, I don't know too much about that technology, but again, I believe it's a paid-for service. Okay, you can get a free sort of usage of that for a period of time. As far as SingleStore is concerned, then, well, we used to have this blob type, and we still have the blob type. For backwards compatibility. I mean, that's the way that SingleStore used to store vectors. Earlier this year, we announced a specific dedicated vector type, okay? And there are built-in functions that we've had for some time, this dot product, Euclidean distance, as a way to determine similarity, how close things are in a kind of vector space. And lots of index options as well. Okay, so I've got some code again. I can show you that momentarily. So essentially, yes, MySQL, there's some possibilities there in terms of working with GenAI, storing these vector sort of data. You probably have to do a little bit more work there, and you may need, third-party support, for example. SingleStore, you can do it today. And because of the closeness in terms of the data, well, getting that data in using the CDC, for example, is a no-brainer. I mean, that will get your data in, and then it's up to you how you want to generate those vectors. Either you may be fortunate in that the data themselves may have the appropriate representation, or just use these large language models to generate the sort of array vector representation and store that in the database as well. And then the nice thing about having a database management system, because sometimes people ask the question, why use a database at all? Well, it's about memory. It's persistence. It is having this kind of long-term memory that once you've gone through the trouble of either generating these kind of representations of the data in a form that an LLM can understand, you might want to reuse that. And you want to keep that data for the long term, okay? And that's where the benefit comes in. Okay, so let me now stop there and just keep an eye on the time. So we are just gone half past the hour. Okay, so let me just stop this. And again, Matt, please let me know if I'm saying something and you can't see my screen. So,
so far, so good.
Okay, there we go. Oh, error starting kernel. Now that's a bit unexpected. There we go. I think it's just sitting idle for too long. So as I said, I promised that I'd show you a couple of things. So now once you've created an account, and let me just find somewhere to go to. Let's go here, okay? And let me just go to start, all right? So when you log in, you'll see something like this. Within your SingleStore portal environment. So on the left-hand side, okay, you can see this kind of left nav, which has a whole bunch of controls. Oops, pardon me. I didn't mean to do that. That seems a bit overly sensitive. Okay, so there we are. Okay, and let me just try and draw a box. There we go. That's what I meant to do. Okay. And you can see here that I've got this thing here, homepage on the left-hand side here. It's one of the top options there. And just below it, it's got start, which is what we're currently looking at. And then just below that, can you see this thing called gallery? And so if you click on that, that will give you a whole bunch of material, very useful, that you can utilize and load. And these are notebooks, okay? So you can see there's a wide range of topics covered here. For example, this first one here on the top row here, ingest data from MongoDB to SingleStore using SQL command setup. Okay, so there, go down further, okay, and you'll see there's in evaluating LLMs with Uptrain, okay, and so on, getting started with notebooks. CDC replication with MongoDB. But if you go down a little bit further here, let me just see if I can find it here. Let's just bear with me. All right, quite a few different. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so if we take a look here, let me just get my arrow there on this side. You can see this thing. It says unified data analysis, SQL and NoSQL on a single database with Kai. Okay, multimodal, relational, and JSON data. And so I've loaded that already. Okay, can you see this one here? So when you click on that, it will load this up. And then where you can find it is in the left-hand side, okay, under notebooks here. Okay, so you can see there, I've got a few others there. This one is the one we're looking at. And so what I've done is just to save a little bit of time, because as Matt knows, I talk too much, and he always wants to get some questions in, which is great. And so I've pre-run this, okay, just to save a bit of time. But here's an environment where we're actually taking data from a couple of different sources, of which MySQL happens to be one of them. But we're also taking some data from an S3 bucket, okay? Sorry, this one. And we're also taking data from MongoDB here. So we're taking data from a variety of different sources, different formats as well, using this pipelines feature, creating the appropriate storage within the database management system. So these are coming into different tables, for example. And then we're actually just able to perform some joins across the data, utilize them. So here we just take the opportunity to just, install some libraries here, as you can see, go down a little bit further. And then here we can straight away start typing in sort of SQL statements here. Okay, create database banking analytics. And there is the mechanism that we've used to set up the CDC for MySQL. So in this particular case, it's very straightforward. I mean, the syntax is well defined. It's in the documentation. We simply point to the host name, provide some details about what we want and the port number and so on, and then provide our credentials as well. And it will create a link for us. Just below then, we initiate this to actually set up the, to infer, take the pipeline. And in this case, we're going to use Avro as the data format. We'll start the pipeline here. Okay, and then we repeat this process here for the two other data sources. So this one is for S3. This one's for MongoDB. Similar sort of format. And then we can just take a look at the pipelines themselves. So you can see a couple of these are running, a couple of these are stopped. I was able to start all of them here. And then what it's done, it's taken the data from these various sources. So here's the first one. Okay, so this is the transactional kind of data from MySQL. And this is kind of deposits and withdrawals. Okay. And if we just do a select here to limit it to just one, we can see an example just below here. Okay, so in this particular case, it's transaction ID 16. There's the account number. There's the date. Okay, the amount that this happens to be a deposit, and then a little bit of a description here, just kind of made up, if you like. Similarly, just below here, same sort of thing. Now, remember, because of the way that this CDC works is once the connection is set up, and unless you stop it, that connection will stay live. And the other benefit that you get from this is that if new data arrives, say on the MySQL side, again, because the pipeline is still running, that will get fed across to SingleStore as well. And then if you want to disable that and kill that off, you can do that. But, you can keep the connection live for new data to arrive. So very, very straightforward, extremely easy. I mean, again, syntax well-defined, and it's in the documentations. It's currently preview, okay? But this is a very easy way to take existing data, feed it into SingleStore, and be able to work with that directly and immediately. And if you want to do some additional processing of that, for example, let's say you are storing some type of product data or some sentiment data, and maybe you want to do some analysis of that, perhaps generate some vectors from that and be able to store that in the database as well. Very easy to do that with the SingleStore. Okay, so let me show you an example. Okay, again, this has been idle for too long, so I'm just getting this error here. So here's an example of where I've taken some kind of product data, if you like. And what I've done is, this is from something from Zalando. Okay, so it's just reading in this data here. So what this is 60,000 rows of 10 different types of products. So things like sweaters, for example, dresses, ankle boots, things like this. I mean, if you work with this data set, you'll know exactly what this is. And these are actually images as well. And typically for this type of data, if you want to store it in MySQL, probably you could pickle it, for example, if you're doing it from Python, store the image that way. And using a blob type, for example. Here, because we know that this is kind of 28 pixels by 28 pixels, it's kind of grayscale. It's two-dimensional. There's the kind of representation of that, if you like. Not very easy to see, but if we just print that out, this very first entry, you can see here, this is what it kind of looks like. There's a little bit of product data there, ankle boot. Okay. And here we've got some other examples of what we are actually storing here. So this is image data, two-dimensional. Very easy then to take this data, and if we simply flatten the two dimensions into one, so 28 by 28 in terms of multiplication, do the math, and that gives you 784 dimensions. And so once it's in that format, what we can do here, okay, now we flatten this. So you can see lots of zeros there, okay, because remember, it's kind of grayscale. But this is just showing the beginning here. This is an ankle boot, t-shirt, top, and so on. These are just showing the sort of first 5 rows here, just to see what we've actually done. And because this is both train and test data, and then creating 2 separate tables in order to store this, we can store this data directly into SingleStore. And that's all I'm doing down here, just connecting to the database system here. If these existing tables exist, just drop them, just so we start with a clean slate. And create the tables. And here I am using this vector type, as you can see. So one of the cool things about this is that I provide the number of dimensions to the vector type, as you can see, because it's 784, I've created this as 784 and not null. And by doing that, it enforces some sort of safety, if you like, to ensure that, yes, it's going to be that large. And there is some compile time type checking as well, which is, again, very, very useful to ensure, give you some degree of confidence that what you are storing is going to be numeric. And if it's not, you'll get some errors and you can deal with those. Just writing that data into SingleStore, and we just read some data back just as a sanity check, just to see what did we actually get, and then we visualize one of these things just to confirm, yes, we are happy that the data has actually gone in correctly. That's great. And then here's the kind of the new innovation that we've added, this vector index. All right, there's a lot of options here, by the way, and if you're interested, yes, there's a whole range of different types of vector indexes that can be supported. I've chosen auto here, partly because I'm lazy. Okay, so I leave it up to the system to take care of it for me, but it's the most easiest one to do. And what is the mechanism that I want to do in terms of the comparison? Well, I'm using Euclidean distance. Okay, so there, for example, the numeric value, when you do the comparison, lower is better. Okay, that means they are closer together. And so what we can do then is take the data, and we can perform some queries on the data without using an index. And I can tell SingleStore and instruct it that use index is blank, Okay, so this order by and use index there, you can see. And this is kind of like a brute force in the sense that no index is used to do this. So over 60,000 kind of rows, actually the performance is pretty good. It's going to work well, but I will get 100% accurate results based on Euclidean distance, okay? So that's absolutely fine. It just returns me, and I'm just simply asking it, okay, here's a particular idea of something. Just find me all the other stuff that is similar to this or as similar as possible to this. So the very first row here is what I'm kind of comparing against, okay? That's why the score is 0, because that's where I'm starting from. And then it's just returned me a whole bunch of these other ones, which are near. And then similarly, I can take something from the test data, which is, essentially showing the system something else that it hasn't seen before, if you like, and then trying to perform the same query here. So again, this is kind of a brute force in the sense that no index is being used, and it's having to plow its way through all of this in order to answer the query. And then what we've done is the index we've created is this approximate nearest neighbor. And as I mentioned earlier, the benefit that you get with that is speed. It will plow its way through millions, potentially billions of data points very, very fast. But you lose some sense of accuracy, okay? I mean, that's what you're giving up. So the speed may be the critical thing in whatever you're trying to do in terms of the analytics you're trying to perform, for example, or some business decision that you need to make. And you're happy to give up the accuracy because it might be good enough, 90%, 95%, whatever, it may be sufficient in terms of the decision that you need to make. And so in this case, we kind of repeat the experiment here. We do the same thing, but this time utilizing the approximate nearest neighbor index. And now it's not the brute force approach anymore. It's actually got something it can use to speed up the result. Okay, and there's the first one. So in this case, fortunately, we see that the result is exactly the same. Okay, in this second case, you see we've actually, rather than all of these being pullovers here, we see a couple of differences. So it's made a few errors here. All right, so that is part of the ANN. Okay, it's not given us everything we wanted, so it's a mistaken shirt. Okay, but in this case, as I said before, it may be sufficient for the sort of business problem that we're trying to do. And just as a quick kind of bonus here, let me just show you a plot here. So visualizing 784 dimensions is rather hard. So you can use a technique called TSNE here, okay? Just basically reduce this to 2 dimensions. So this kind of shows you things in a nice way, because what you get to see is, ankle boots and, sandals and sneakers happen to be very similar in terms of where they lie. And that kind of helps to explain why sometimes, with ANN, the answers are wrong, okay? Because something is kind of close enough, but it's not the exact thing that you're looking for. And therefore, that's where the kind of incorrect answer comes out. All right, so there's a whole bunch of stuff at the bottom of this, which I'll leave for now. All right, there we go. So the key point I'm trying to get across here is that definitely, if you've invested in MySQL, yeah, great product, okay? Has its limitations. There are techniques that you can use to get the data across to SingleStore where you will benefit from the analytic capabilities, the vector capabilities. If you're doing GenAI, for example, very easy to get the data across, generate these. In this case, we were fortunate in that we've got the kind of vector representation already, but we might use an LLM to do that for us. That's absolutely fine. But we can store that representation now in a dedicated vector type. We can create some indexes on that as well. And that index support is only going to get better, okay? And then, yes, with something like ANN, we are sacrificing accuracy for speed. But the thing is, that might be perfectly acceptable. And given that we might be dealing with enormous quantities of data, like I said, millions, billions of data points, having that result back in sub-second could be very critical to us in our business sort of decisions and the kind of what we're looking for in terms of, investment opportunities or threats that we might want to deal with, or new challenges that we may be facing in terms of our business. Okay, so let me just go back here. Where were we? This one. Okay, so at that point, let me just mention this again, okay, and then keep an eye on the time. So Matt will be happy because today I finished a bit early, so leave enough time for some questions. And so, as I said before, the gallery is an awesome place to start because it's got great resources. That CDC example you saw, we've got GenAI stuff there. All of those notebooks are within that space. Okay, so we don't have to give you a separate GitHub link to be able to go and find stuff. Now you can just do it there. Creating your account is very, very simple. And Matt did mention one thing that I suddenly realized I hadn't actually shown you, but I could do so whilst we are here. So if we just go here on the left-hand side, can you see this thing called group? Hopefully you can see that. Okay,
I
let me
can
just
see it.
highlight
Yep.
that. Yeah. If I click on this, can you see here? There we go. Start a workspace. So Matt mentioned this a little bit earlier on. And this on the left-hand side is what you can now run. Okay. And it runs on AWS only at the moment. Oh, pardon me. I'm trying to do too much there. Trying to be too clever. There we are. Okay. It's free. Okay, so you're not burning through any credits. The standard one on the right-hand side here is, like I said, $600 worth of credits, but you could start with this starter workspace. And literally, as you can see here, I mean, you've got a couple of things pre-filled in here. You can change the database name here as well. It's down the bottom here. I could change the workspace name as well. I just click this thing here, right? And watch this. So there you are. You've got it. It's instantaneous. There's your workspace, compute environment, and there's your database ready to go. 1 second, I would say, or less. Straight away, you can get going. There we go. All right. Just show this. Matt, questions, please, sir. Have we got any?
Let's get into it. Everyone, you can feel free to participate. There's that button at the bottom of your Zoom console. Again, we'll try to get to as many as we can, and then we'll follow up with any folks via email if we don't get to anything. Akmal, I've seen one from Khaled about, can you try any other distance metric other than Euclidean distance? I know I've heard Eric talk about, is it cosine similarity or something, or you're better to answer this than me?
Yes, Khaled. So the two out-of-the-box functions that SingleStore supports are dot product and Euclidean distance. Cosine similarity, we don't have a specific function for that, but you can code it up. We've got examples in our documentation to show how you could do that with SQL. And basically, it's just dot product, and I think the square SQRT function in SQL. Or SQR function, I forgive me off the top of my head. But yes, that's something that you could do as well. There's an article I think I published not so long ago in DZone, and I ought to remember this. I think my brain is just too full these days, but those are the three main ones. Two of them directly supported as functions. The third one you can code up and represent. That's absolutely fine.
And then I see Sarah has just asked, what is CDC or Chi?
Okay, CDC change data capture, and Chi is the SingleStore Chi is the MongoDB compatibility that we provide. Okay, so for example, if let's say you are running perhaps a MongoDB instance, could be local, for example, or in maybe on-prem, or Atlas, for example, which is the offering from MongoDB, and you want to ingest some data from MongoDB Atlas. Again, you can set up this pipeline. And that first notebook that I showed you actually does three things. It does the MySQL, it does S3, and it does MongoDB. So if you look at the code, you'll see that the way that you set it up, very similar to the way that you do it for the other two. So you create the pipeline, it will ingest the data, bring it across, and then you get awesome performance, up to 1,000x faster than Atlas for some analytical queries.
Awesome. And then I see Lucas Franco asked two questions. I think this was while you were presenting your ANN notebook. The first one was, is GenAI using ChatGPT 4 here? And then his follow-up question was, does the OpenAI have access to your data? As I have a project that I cannot share the data with OpenAI.
Okay, understood. Okay, so in the first one, I think it's 3.5 it would be the one that there, if you pay OpenAI some money, you get access to better stuff. I'm rather poor, okay, and I don't want to claim too much through my company, so I try. I mean, it's being an academic. That's where this comes from. Okay, you run things on a shoestring. Okay, that's where this thinking kind of comes from. So I'm using older versions. And then remember, OpenAI has a whole load of models that you can use, which are very competitive in terms of their pricing. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the latest and greatest. Okay, you can use something that's maybe a year or two old, and that's still actually very good. And then in terms of the data, yes, that's a concern we see very often. And the main thing there is that OpenAI, as far as I understand, it will not retain any of your data unless you give them permission. So the default is they never keep your data. Now, obviously, if you're sending stuff across the wire to them, they're potentially any kind of man in the middle type of attacks or something like that you need to think about. You might want to consider alternatives, such as running an LLM locally within your own environment. So say something from like Llama 2, for example, there are very good quality, high quality open source LLMs available, which you can use within your own environment, and they give you capabilities almost as good as what you pay for from some of these commercial vendors.
Awesome. Good stuff. And I'm trying to link to some of those webinars we've done on running LLMs locally. We're also doing a webinar soon, though I don't think we have the page up for it yet, but stay tuned. It's called Protecto. It's like encryption for LLM security. So stay tuned for that. And then I see Sarah's got another good question here.
Yeah.
One last question. How does CDC work if there's new data? We have data with a lot of deletions and updates. Can this be managed by CDC?
That's a great question. I mean, the open source technology we use is Debezium, I think. That's the underlying technology that what our product is based upon. I can look into that for you, Sarah. So that's something that we can follow up with you. But great question. Thank you very much for that. Off the top of my head, I don't have a good answer for you, but it's something I will check and find out. And it's something I'll want to know as well for the future. So thank you for that.
Good stuff. And then and I should mention, I put this in like the group chat about emailing us at hello@singlestore.com. Akmal is on that group. So if you email that, he will get access to your question. We can follow up with these. Let's see. It looks like Lucas has a follow-up for your answer. Thank you. Any LLM are you suggesting to use except Llama, something that has fast answers?
Oh, okay. You obviously know your stuff, Lucas. So that's a great question, sir. What's that one? Mistral, is it?
Mistral, yeah, we've done
Yeah,
a
just been
webinar on
enough.
that one.
I've heard good things about that. And I think it's meant to be almost as good as OpenAI's offering. Again, because the pace of technology is so fast, there's hardly time to learn anything because the next big thing comes up. So I've got a huge list of things I need to look at. I just don't have the time. But I think look at some of these other offerings as well. I think they look like they are as good in terms of quality. And because they are open source, again, you have the opportunity to run this stuff wherever you want. And then, just evaluate them as you would any other technology. The fact that open source is good, but at the end of the day, if you have a business proposition, and you're using this in a production environment and you're not getting the answers fast enough, then it may be necessary to look at perhaps a commercial offering.
Good stuff. I think we're at the top of the hour. So once again, we'll follow up with any unanswered questions via email. Quick note before we announce the AirPods winner. Once again, on Friday, we're going to be presenting how to build a multi-agent app with AutoGen. That's the Microsoft new open source tool, which can seamlessly communicate with SingleStore. I will put that RSVP link in the chat one more time. Hope to see you there on Friday. It should be a really fun session. And then the announcement you have been waiting for, today's AirPods go to Venkat, the head of transformation at Barclays United Kingdom. Congrats, Venkat. Thanks for joining. If that's not you, don't give up. We're going to give out one more AirPods to someone by the end of the day, someone who has tried out Akmal's demos today. So we're going to send a link to that. Once again, the gallery, those spaces, those notebooks, those are all available inside the product. If you just log in, you can get access to that gallery of notebooks. I've also put a link in the chat. We also have it available on our website if you want to check it out on the website, but not log into the product. So thank you, Akmal, for an awesome presentation and demo as usual today. And thank you to our audience. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.